Hi everybody, it's Colin Ellis here. It's Monday the 18th of October and welcome to another edition of the Culture and Coffee podcast. 18th of October, I was saying yesterday, I can't believe how quickly this year's gone, even though we haven't been able to go anywhere or necessarily do much. Why is it that the days just fly by? It's the same on holiday, I think, as well, sometimes. Is that like you really look forward to your 2 week holiday? Like 2 weeks of work, for me tends to be quite hectic. It never goes that fast, which is great because I love what I do. But like on holiday, you sit down for 5 minutes and you're halfway through your holiday. You're just like, what? How did that happen? Absolutely bonkers. Yes, so hello, wherever you are in the world. I hope everything's okay with you. I hope life's retaining some kind of normality. It's never going back the way it was before. I still think there's this real desire for people to get back to the way things were before. I was thinking about it at the weekend. It's all I do think about it, to be honest. And things are changing here, which is really good. But I think about things like, in winter, where I can, I always take public transport. I fly a lot generally. And obviously in the winter, people get sick. And there's always someone coughing and spluttering. And now I'm like, like I could have worn a mask in the past. We have a large Asian population here in Melbourne, and they always wore masks. Presumably because where they're from. I remember when I was in Hong Kong doing some work, is everyone had a mask on there, and the air quality was appalling. I'm like, oh, I get that. But here it's not part of our culture to wear a mask. But that all of a sudden now it is. And so in the winter, I would definitely wear a mask on public transport in winter. I think as well, we've become really infatuated with numbers here. Here, probably every country with regards to the COVID numbers. Like, how did that become a thing? And are we going to produce the numbers for every disease every year? Because I think if we did, we'd be absolutely terrified to go out when you realize just what people catch. And anyway, so yes, I hope everything's going back. So let's talk about the coffee. Let me just take a quick sip here. Oh yes, that's very nice. It's a Gikirima from Kenya, which is roasted by Everyday Coffee Roasters in Collingwood, Melbourne. So a couple of things here. So when we first arrived, I'll talk about the coffee in a second. When we first arrived in Melbourne in 2013, in the way that we did although the way that we emigrated from the UK to New Zealand was different because I had a job then, so that was good, and they were helping relocators. They were doing everything. Awesome organisation to work for. Whereas, and when we came to Melbourne, we literally had nothing. We had just enough money to survive here for 3 months, and then we literally had no idea what we would have to do. Well, we would probably have gone back to New Zealand, and I would have leveraged, as they say, my contacts there. But when we moved to Melbourne, we settled in a suburb called Clifton Hill. We wanted to find a really good school for the kids to go to. That was the most important thing. The kids are really young at that time. They were, I don't know, I want to say, what year was it, 2013? So 6 and 4 they would have been. And we settled in Clifton Hill. So we weren't far from Collingwood. It's this really cool little suburb. And Everyday Coffee Roasters was on the street called Johnston Street there. And we would go. And I remember Christmas Day, we went for a walk and it was open. It was open on Christmas Day and you could buy a coffee and all the money went to charity. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. I know it sounds a bit random, but to go and get a coffee on Christmas Day. And obviously for us, we would kind of, we'd left our culture that we were familiar with back in England, which is you get up, you open your presents, you start eating, you fall asleep at various stages through the day, you get drunk, you carry on eating, and then you go to bed. And so to actually get up, put a pair of shorts on instead of a big coat and walk and get a coffee was really cool. So so Everyday Coffee Roasters, they moved now. They inevitably the place that they were in is now apartments, or is going to be apartments, of course it is. Anyway, the coffee Gikirima is from Embu in Kenya. So Embu is around about 125 kilometers northeast from Nairobi. So it's about a 2-hour drive. And it's a 9-hour drive from Lake Victoria in the west. If you don't know much about Lake Victoria, it's a fascinating kind of body of water in almost in the middle and to the right, I would say, of Africa. Everything I know about geography, by the way, I learned from Michael Palin travel shows. That's everything I learned, which I am just addicted to. And it's also got Serengeti National Park to the southwest, for those of you who are interested in those kind of things. But just a little bit about Lake Victoria, or Ukerewe, as it's known in Lugandan, was discovered by Englishman John Hanning Speke in 1858, of course, discovered by Englishman John Hanning Speke. He was searching for the source of the Nile, and he found this incredible body of water, which he called Lake Victoria, which, as you can imagine, in 1858, it was named after Victoria Beckham, I think. Anyway, Embu have a cooperative, so in this particular region, it's a really good coffee growing region. You have a cooperative, so there's lots of different lots of different lots of lots of different groups of people who all grow coffee, and then each one of the lots has like kind of hundreds of smallholders from the area surrounding essentially what is the big washing station or the factory. I'm going to talk about more about the coffee process. Somebody emailed and asked me to talk a bit more about that, so I'll definitely do that in a future podcast. Talk about how you get from coffee cherry, it's essentially a cherry, to a bean. So then when it gets to the factory, all the cherries are sorted before they go into production. So that's a little bit about Kenya. So this particular coffee has notes of grapefruit. Let's just taste it again. Notes of grapefruit with a brown sugar finish. Grapefruit, I mean, yeah, I suppose we're getting a little bit of grapefruit. Brown sugar. Oh, the song Brown Sugar, just in case you didn't know. Brown Sugar is by the Rolling Stones. Brown Sugar. It's just me saying brown sugar in a different way. Rolling Stones fans, you'll know that. It's my perfect impression of Mick Jagger. Rolling Stones was written by Mick Jagger in 1969, it's the year I was born, while he was filming the movie Ned Kelly in Australia. There you go. And he was filming it in Braidwood, New South Wales, and he wrote Brown Sugar. All right. Throughout the week, I don't stop reading. So as well as delivering, so as well as doing all of the stuff that companies employ me to do, and there's a lot, and now that we're opening up here in Australia, I've literally got people just back to back. It's almost like a traffic jam waiting for me to deliver in person. So I'm very excited about that. It's about to get very, very busy, and it means I'm going to get to do the podcast from different parts of the world. There's a couple of countries that I'll be traveling to, hopefully. But I'm constantly reading articles in the news and all of those kinds of things. Also, I like, even in my downtime, because we all need downtime, right, to refresh ourselves, I just read stuff. And so I thought I'd share with you 5 things I learned this week. I just wrote them down as I learned them. I thought, I'll share these on the podcast. So the first thing is, did you know that saliva is used to restore paintings? Now, this isn't an excuse, like you can't just go into an art gallery and just spit. I was going to say gob, but that's such a little. Don't gob on the paint. You can't go in and spit on paintings and go, I'm doing my bit to restore. Go and spit on the Mona Lisa or something. What are you doing? Hey, I'm just doing my bit to restore it. But apparently it's been used for millennia, saliva. So they dispense saliva, spit in a jar. And then they use like cotton buds to wipe it. And so I've got this box set of DVDs of this art show called The Private Life of a Masterpiece, where they look at individual paintings and tell the story, which I just absolutely love. And yeah, so I learned that from that. The second thing, I had a block sink, as you do. And you can use laundry detergent to unblock sinks. So all of these fancy sink unblockers, all you do is get a cap full of laundry detergent, pour it down the sink, and then like 2 jugs of hot water, and it unblocks it. Who knew? So that's the second thing that I learned. The third thing I learned, so I'm getting excited about going shopping again. like every 52-year-old man, super excited to go shopping. And I'm going to buy a couple of new pairs of shoes because I like shoes. Great quote that I always remember is, it's better to buy one great pair of shoes than four cheap pairs of shoes. There you go. And I want to buy a pair of penny loafers. And I just thought, oh, I wonder why they're called penny loafers. It's because back in the 1930s, payphones in the US, they cost 2 cents. And there was a loafer design. And what it did was it allowed, there was just enough space in the design to allow you to put a penny in each shoe inside the design of the shoe itself. So I read that on the Brooks Brothers website, and that's why they're called penny loafers, because you could put a penny inside the design of the shoe. The fourth thing, which is probably more relevant to this podcast, is the first espresso machine was invented in Milan in 1906 by Luigi Bezzera and Desiderio Pavoni. And I always imagined that it would be in Italy because they just do the best coffee. I got a Florence story. I won't tell it now. I'll tell a story about when we were in Florence and on a future podcast. But what I didn't realize was that it wasn't designed and manufactured to make quality coffee, which I just assumed that's what it was. It was kind of refined to make quality coffee. It was done so they could make coffee at scale, which then just seems way more like, yeah, of course. Why did I think it was something else? So yeah, it would the coffee machine. It's essentially steam pressure. It was so they could make 150 coffees an hour. So that's why the espresso machine was invented, so they could make more coffee. And then the last thing that I learned was my 78-year-old father is in a new relationship and has already been on holiday to Mallorca with her. So I discovered that quite by chance. I had a random dream about my mum, thought I would phone my dad, and mum's dead, by the way. It's been dead for 4 years, and found out he was in a new... No one had told me. That's the thing about being halfway around the world. Apparently, it absolves you of any responsibility to tell you anything proactively. And it's up to me to ask a load of questions. In culture news, there were the 5 things, by the way. In culture news, we should start a new section. Culture news with Colin Ellis. Culture news, the head coach of an NFL team. There was an NFL team in the news last week. He was fired a week ago for sending emails that were both racist and homophobic. And then he said, they don't represent who I am. And when I read these stories, I'm always like, what are you thinking? Firstly, what are you thinking? Like, don't be racist or homophobic. I mean, that they're just givens, or should be. Don't be those things. And then don't put it in an email. If that is who you are, don't write it down and then say it's not who you are when you've actually had the time to think about it and write it down. Like, that's not who I am. Really? That's not really who you are? You sat down and deliberated over the word. It's not something you said while you were drunk or in the heat of the moment. Still, I'm going to question if it is who you really are because it's coming out. But you had time to sit down and go, right, let me write some words down here that could be inflammatory. No, I should really caveat it. This is not who I really am. Racism, homophobic language. Like, what are they thinking? And there's so many examples of it. And they're like, yes, that's not the kind of person I am. But it clearly is because you wrote it down. All right, let's talk about... Done all of that now. Got all that off my chest. This is my weekly therapy session. Thanks so much for listening. Let's talk about simplicity. That's the topic. The headline is, are you overcomplicating work? What we're talking about here is simplicity. One of my favorite quotes with regards to simplicity is by the genius that is Leonardo da Vinci. If you really want to feel like your life is small and you have achieved nothing, read about Leonardo da Vinci. You're like, wow, like I can barely dress myself. By the time I've dressed myself, he's invented a million things and painted masterpieces. So he said, Da Vinci said, he said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I love that quote. And it's something that I used when I worked in bureaucratic organizations, and it's something I use when I work with bureaucratic organizations. I guess the more modern day version of that is Steve Jobs said, simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. And so that's, I suppose that's the modern day equivalent of that. And what I love about both of those things is what they're doing is really focusing the mind on the fact that if you put time, thought, effort into making the complex easy to understand, then it makes it easier to get work done. And yet most organizations, from what I can see, and those that I've worked with and or for, they seem to thrive on making it difficult. The word bureaucracy kind of exists for a reason, and that's to shine light on some of the nonsense things that people do. Interestingly, here in Australia in 2017, probably about 2018, you had all these banks who suddenly were embracing the agile movement, even though it had been around for 17 years. Welcome to the party, lads. But suddenly started embracing the agile movement and sent everybody on Scrum training because that's what they thought you should do, presumably. And yet, at the same time, there was a report done into their practices because they were highly unethical. So there's an entire Royal Commission set up. And one of the key findings from the Royal Commission was that the banks are actually mired in bureaucracy and had a penchant, what a great word that is, penchant for creating committees and cultivating complexity, all at the same time as they were telling the world how agile they were. Bureaucracy is an agility killer. It really, really is. Because what you're doing is putting systems and things in place to stop you getting work done. It's an absolute nonsense. So Deloitte every year do what they call a human capital trends report. And this is a great time of the year for me because I really look forward to reading all the research into culture. We've almost had a full year. I never thought I'd be the kind of person that would say that, but there you go. I remember one human capital trends report that I read, and it's a stat that I love quoting back to CEOs. It's 75% of senior business leaders admitted their organizations were too complex in terms of their structures, in terms of the process. So this is 3/4 of senior business leaders said the way we do stuff is too hard. And yet only half of them had any kind of projects in place to address that. Only half. So there's this recognition that work was way too hard, but actually we're not going to do anything about it. And I think sometimes it's a convenience excuse. It's a convenience excuse to say, "Oh no, that's not the process." Like I'm just about to start work with a new client. If you're listening, by the way, you might recognize this. I'm really looking forward to working with you, but this is a bit of a nonsense. So we had to send all our banking details because you have to get set up on, all these accounts and stuff, which is cool. So we have to send like a bank statement and a letterhead, something from the 1980s. I was waiting for that. You have to fax it. So we had to send these things. So an actual bank statement, right, with my bank details on. So we sent them a bank statement with my bank details on. Then someone from the office rang me to check that they were my bank details. I'm like, well, why would I send you anybody else's? And that, and classic thing is like, I'm just phoning up. Can you give me your bank details? I'm like, well, no, because, every cybersecurity rule in the world dictates that you don't give your bank details out from to a random stranger. And I said, I'm really interested in why you're doing this. It's like, oh, that's the process. It's like, yeah, but I'm really interested in why you're doing it. Oh, it's always been the process. I'm like, it doesn't necessarily. She's probably regretting getting me. Why did I get this guy? Why couldn't I have got, kind of Jane who would have just given me the bank statements, or Bill who would have just said, of course, here they are. Why did I have to get the guy who questioned it? It's like, but what if we've sent you all of those? I'm not going to send you anybody else's bank details, am I? If you got my bank details and it said, I don't know, Prince Mubasa in Kenya, you maybe question it then. But again, people love to hide behind process, and they love to hide behind bureaucracy. It's something that I faced all of the time when I was working in the public services. Things have been done for years in a particular way. Now, if you've got good governance processes in place, then what governance does is it kind of rids you, or it should do if it's done well. It should rid you of the processes that aren't working well, and the people, to be honest. It should rid you of those. And so I really got into the habit, and I encouraged it of my teams, is continually ask yourself the question, why do we do it in this way? Is there a better way? Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute you should be difficult, right? I'm not suggesting that why are we doing it this way? But there are just not some things that we do that's a bit of a nonsense. And I think not questioning it, by not questioning it, you're doing yourself and the organisation a disservice. I think what you should be doing is really looking to chop out some of the dumb stuff that you do. And in my workshops, one of the things that we discuss is, what are some dumb things that you do? I do a whole section on innovation. I show people how easy innovation is. And it's just by questioning some of the dumb things that you do that have become the culture, because we didn't ask ourselves the question, is there a better, smarter way to do things? Now, of course, the great cultures in the world, they build simplicity in. What they do is they challenge people to come up with, they even reward people for coming up with better, smarter ways to do things. And I remember reading a book once, I can't remember. Oh, it was called Uncommon Sense, Common Nonsense, it was called. And in the book, there was a paragraph about creating a simplicity circle. And I loved that idea. It's something that, again, in my big culture workshops, I talk to organizations about, and they're like, oh yeah, it's great. They didn't go into any detail in the book of what a simplicity circle was, but essentially what they were saying is, we have all these quality management processes. Why haven't we got some form of body or group of people that meets to talk about keeping things easy, keeping things simple? And so that's something that you can take from the podcast is kind of, what are you doing as a group of people to challenge some of the dumb things that we do? And the reason that we make things complex, there's a number of reasons we make things complex. It's firstly, we can't be arsed. Like, people just can't be bothered to change stuff. They've become really, really comfortable with the way that in fact, some people have made it their job to become comfortable with like their super fund and their pension fund is wrapped up in that dumbass process. It's just like, right, we're just going to do this forever because that's the way that, we like to work. So that's one thing. I think there's a lack of courage sometimes. I think people love to use acronyms. I don't like acronyms. They love to use acronyms because, either they're trying to demonstrate just how much they know, but often they don't, or that they're like kind of hiding behind words. They're hoping to bamboo. Me and my wife and I've been rewatching the TV series The Thick of It. Got the BBC series The Thick of It. Got that on DVD, which is so great, about the machinery of government. But they deliberately make things competent. Just listen to Boris Johnson, you'll know what I mean. Make things complicated in the hope you'll stop listening, that you then won't question it. And they don't like it then when you say, but why? And it's our job as the people, I'm going to sound like a radical lefty here, it's our job as the people to question leaders. We've got a bunch of stuff going on here. Like, I can jog next to someone else breathing heavily without a mask here in Victoria, but I can't walk with someone I live with without wearing a mask. But no one's asking the question why. Like, just nobody. Don't even get me started on the press here. So I think, there's a reason why people make things hard, but that shouldn't stop you and your teams from asking the question. Now, what you want to do is focus on the things that you can really influence, focus on the things that impact you. Don't try and change the entire organization, but you want to look for ways to make work simpler and easier to do. So stop using acronyms for a start. Don't give your projects flashy names. Project Refresh. Like, what is it? What do you just tell people what? They're not dumb. They want to know, they can see you creating this complex thing in the hope you don't ask any questions, right? So just keep it simple. So ditch the acronyms. Don't do that. Don't have an acronym dictionary. Don't do that. That's just your way of saying, look how complicated we are. Look how complicated we've made stuff. And part of our induction process is to tell you how complicated it is to work here. That's what that does. So don't do that. Check your buzzwords and check your phrases. What are those things that you potentially use that might seem as ways of complicating stuff? And if you want to make it fun, you could play lingo bingo, or BS bingo as people call it. Play lingo bingo. Every time someone uses a word like, I don't know, ecosystem, or effective means not. Cascade, turnkey, hated that one. Turnkey, what does that mean? Deep, we need a deep knowledge, right? What do you mean by deep? Is knowledge enough? What's deep? Like I have to put on some diving apparatus. Drill down. Play lingo bingo and just start challenging some of those things that you do to make life at work complicated. Simpler is better. Simpler is most definitely better. And that's your podcast for today. Stay well wherever you are. Ta-ra for now.